Good morning, good afternoon, maybe for many. Um, I'm Jonas Igbaum, Director of Sales Engineering at Curity, and I'm joined by Judith. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, Judith, product marketing engineer at Curity.
We are going to talk about what happens when we expose AI agents to customers and when they leverage uh, corporate data and how to get the security right around all of that. And we have an agenda. So we'll cover the landscape. What does things look like right now, and why, with that, traditional IAM breaks today, essentially. Um, and what is it that actually that the AI agent need in order to handle this scenario safely and securely, and how all of this relates into compliance and regulations. Uh, Following that with some look at what we have seen and what we have in production today and what reasonable next steps for essentially you guys could be actionable roadmap for how to implement this in your environment today. And last but not least, we'll do a Q&A. So feel free to chat in the questions as we go along. We might cover some as we go along, but we'll essentially handle most of the questions at the end here in the Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Judith, to start off with setting the stage for where we are right now.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. So we collected some numbers for you um, that describe the current state and some predictions, because predictions, they're pretty cool. So Gartner says, or predicts that 70% of customers will use conversational AI to start their service journey. So most of the customer interaction will be through those AI tools. And at the same time, another report from Curity reveals that 88% of organizations report AI agent security incidents or security incidents that they confirmed or suspect are related to AI agents, which means it's pretty big risk when you introduce that, or can be a pretty big risk, especially if you look at the last prediction of Gartner here in the list, where they say that more than half of the AI security incidents will be related to access control issues. They will try to exploit access control issues. So this is not a future problem. It's a problem that you have now, right now, if you're going to go into that space or are already in that space. But I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to not do it. I mean, having AI agents or a conversational interface can make sense because you can have instant and personalized user experience. But that also means that you need to operate on actual customer data. You can provide 24/7 support for multiple languages in multiple channels. You can have an agent doing some of the work, actually navigate the system, trigger transactions, act autonomously on behalf of the customer. So you can get much more automation. And you can see that already in some environments like insurance claims, banking, commerce, they use that already. So it's a great opportunity. But the problem that they normally don't talk at the board level is that, well, if you operate on customer data, it also means that it's sensitive data, and you need APIs that expose that data. The agents call those APIs dynamically. They chain the services. They make autonomous decisions, sometimes with a human in the loop, sometimes not, sometimes in the context of users, sometimes completely on their own behalf. And one of the main challenges is really they are non-deterministic. So you're not really sure what they're going to end up with. So you can't really predict. When you implement AI agents, you should think about those things, because you have to expect that a lot of things, as I said before, are going to be replaced by AI agents. So Gartner predicts once more that 20% of interaction at digital storefronts going to be replaced by AI machine customers. That 33% of enterprise software will include some sort of agentic AI. And yeah, but also, as I said before, 80% of common customer service issues resolved autonomously. That kind of ties together to the first slide that we have. So there's a volume coming, and you have to prepare for that. Because, Jonas, what happens if you don't prepare? Why is it not enough to just continue the way we have it right now?
Yeah, let's talk about that because the current situation of IAM kind of doesn't really fit well into this, right? We have this new way or new entity that needs identity or need access control. But and then as we can see, these numbers are pretty staggering, right? Like there's gonna be lots and lots and lots of this. We're just kind of scratching the surface right now. What's been deployed and what's talked about, I think. Um, but so we have existing IAM solutions, but why do they break? So let's drill down into what it looks like today. So everything in our traditional IAM models is not broken overall, but it's broken to handle this, right? Um, it it assumes that there's a human sitting at a keyboard, opening a browser and typing a password in general, right? Um, and that works really well because the login flow there, the screens, the session cookies, the like MFA prompts are pass keys. It makes sense. It works when there's a person involved. But spoiler alert, AI agents don't have a browser and they don't really have a keyboard to that extent either. They can't put their finger on a fingerprint reader to authenticate using their passkey. So um, they exist sometimes for just a couple of seconds. They spin up, they call a couple of APIs, and then they go away, right? That's very different. So the identity model that has served us for what, a couple of decades isn't really built for that scenario. So it's not that these systems are necessarily bad, they're excellent in what they're designed to do originally, when we deal with users. The problem is that um, the the world we're moving into, the architecture of these system hasn't really moved with it. So if the IDP can really only answer who is the user, then it can't really help us with requesting access to other things here. So we need to shift our sort of mental model here to an application centric identity. So if we, I think, yeah. Um, so instead of asking when authentication or identification happens, who is the user, we need to ask, what does this application need to know to safely grant access? AI agents are applications. They call APIs, they access data, um, they act on behalf of users. So when you treat them as applications rather than inventing a new like identity category or identity type, you you avoid a massive problem. You avoid identity sprawl. So some vendors are taking the approach of giving every single agent like its own identity, a persistent identity. You're going to end up with a directory entry, a lifecycle, access reviews, eventually, in the end, decommissioning. That works for users, employees who stick around for years. Um, Agents aren't users again, right? They appear, they do some work, and then they go away. So they exist for milliseconds or seconds. And it could be like a multi-agent chain, right? So this could, for one specific scenario, this could happen many times over. So if every one of those needs a persistent identity record in some kind of directory or what have you, you're essentially just creating your next generation orphaned accounts that we've dealt with, right? Um, Before that, I think we had kind of more sort of role explosion and things of that nature that needed to be cleaned up. So we don't want to recreate that, and this is going to be massive if we do it this way. There's going to be much more to clean up than we had to deal with orphan accounts, because this happens at like machine speed, right? It's not a slow churn like we had with users.
Yeah, but if you have a long-running agent in your own environment, there is nothing like you can still have an identity, because that one won't just, it's not ephemeral, right?
Right.
But for the others, avoid it.
And the identity is interesting, right? So
Mm.
the agent has an identity, but in reality, in these cases, there's two identities. Actually, we say two identities here, but it could be even more than two identities in these scenarios, right? I already mentioned sort of like there's a chain of agents potentially running, but in almost all cases, the agent is acting on behalf of a user or customer, right? Um, so if it's, Judith, you mentioned like insurance as an example. We'll look more at that later for sure. But imagine an insurance chatbot checking a claim status or something like that. There's two identities at play there, right? There's the agent itself, and then there's a customer that the agent is operating on behalf of to check the claim. So the customer that kind of owns the claim, right? So a well-designed system here separates this cleanly in one single token, where you where the receiving API, the claims API in that scenario that gets the request and the token, will get something that it can read and interpret as this is agent X acting on behalf of customer Alice or something like that, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be important later in the compliance, when we're going to talk about
Exactly.
compliance. So, but the point here is
Exactly.
that yeah,
It makes it auditable, right?
yeah. So you have all of the information in the token.
Exactly. And so
Yeah, we touched
here's
on
sort
that.
of so here's sort of like the one-liner here. Like the question isn't who is the user. The question is what does this application need to know to safely grant access? That's essentially what we're looking for here, right? So it's this is where it shifts, right? We often talk about subject, right? You and I, Judith, that operate in this space all the time. I mean, subject, when we talk about subject, we know exactly what it is. And we as users used to be the subject, but in this scenario, we're actually the context of it, right? And I think that is a pretty big shift in how we have to think about access,
Yeah,
moving from users to access.
exactly. The user is just one of the things that you need to consider when you do access controls. It's not the only thing. That's what.
Combination with a bunch of other things, right? So I used to be in that authorization space a long time ago, and so then now to me, this like the subject or the user is just another attribute now.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what we mean by moving from thinking about the users to thinking about access.
Exactly.
And that brings us to AI agents, because Yeah, it's not enough to think about the users. AI agents need more. They need this context to make a dynamic context-aware decision at runtime. So it's not about static roles, it's not about static permissions, it's about real-time evaluation of the user, of the agent, of the context, of the policies, the associated risk, the time, whatever you attributes you need, whatever context you need to make a decision. Because AI agents, once again, they are applications and they get the tokens, and the tokens, they carry all the information, all the intelligence that the APIs need to then enforce the access control. And if you do it correctly, then you enforce and validate the access token every time you get the request. So you get this just enough privileges and just enough time, or in just in time access. So you have, on the one hand, you have the ephemeral clients. So you have to deal with clients that can come and disappear, that don't have a, or they have a life cycle, but they have a very short one. You need to give them an access for a very short time. And this is where token intelligence comes in, where you give where the token carries the permissions for that time, and just enough permissions that the API then can use for its runtime authorization, where it evaluates and enforces the access continuously at every step. Every time there comes a request, it validates the access token and checks whether it should gain access. And I mean, sometimes you want to, I mean, access tokens, they have a lifetime, even if it's a short one. And sometimes you want to have another confidence, another step. And then you can have human in the loop constructs where you re-authenticate the user, where you like collect consent from the user for a high privileged action. So most of the things can happen automatically, but for the high risk actions, you can pause the flow and ask a user or a user doesn't for approval, which means you can verify the trust. You can say, is this really an action you want to do, and not just assume it's okay. So this is also
It's
zero trust.
it's sort of like the agent can have on its own sort of permissions to maybe read some data, but then, you want to execute a transaction. Obviously, you want to kind of get consent, because I'm building up here to sort of, yeah, we got that audits and regulatory compliance and whatnot. So you need to capture some of that in that transaction there. If there's a higher privilege thing that needs to happen, like, oh, now I want to buy a stock or something like that, you need to capture consent that the user is okay with the agent executing that on behalf of that user, right?
Yeah, and you also have to balance user experience with security. I mean, you could have this human in the loop for every request, but that would be a
Right.
very bad experience.
Yep. We've
So you,
probably all experienced that already, right? Like if you
yeah,
use sort of Claude Code or something like that, it's like, can I do this? Yes. Can I do this? Yes. And yeah, that user experience isn't that great. So,
no, and there's a security like aspect to that as well, because you get tired of it, right? So
yep,
you just click yes because you just want to get your job done and you don't
exactly.
pay attention anymore. So that's going to be dangerous as well.
Yep.
Um, but speaking of privileges and what you give to agents, you should aim for zero standing privileges. So not only least privileges, but also clean up afterwards. Um, because least privileges for agents actually means you give them the permissions that they need to do their job, but you don't know what job they're going to do in the extreme case, because everything is dynamic. You don't know what APIs it's going to call. So least privileges is not enough, but you have to do it in a very short term. So only grant access when it's needed for only the time it is needed. So don't use any static credentials, no API keys, no basically refresh tokens, just new access tokens with the access scope reevaluated every time every time you issue it. Because authentication, that's a moment, but the authorization, that's a process that you have to continually evaluate. And on the API side, because the API, that's a data plane. That's where access happens. That's where the data is. That's where you have to enforce the access control. And for that, you need the control plane, the identity. You need the authorization information, the access token, so that you can enforce those rules, so that you have the data, or a lot of data. And for that, you need to make that work with AI agents, you need a very robust API infrastructure. And that's also actually not something that just we say, it's also something that Gartner says. And if you think about it, most of the tools are APIs. They are MCP servers, they are functions that you call, they are other AI agents. But in essence, it's all about API calls. And that also means that if you want to get to this robust API infrastructure, you need to have universal services. You should have the same APIs that can serve mobile apps, web portals, or AI agents. If you do an API first design, you don't have to rebuild for AI agents. You can extend what you have. The architecture is already done. And that also means that you don't need special APIs for your AI agents. And no new security model can reuse whatever you have. And we have customers like EF Insurance that launched a product last year, EF GPT, that actually uses this approach. They had their APIs and they could reuse the APIs for their AI agent or AI initiative. It's the same APIs, it's the same access controls, it's just a different application. So make sure you have reusable APIs. You don't have to rebuild. That's a really powerful thing to do. And when it comes to AI agents, one of the standards is MCP, right? MCP is a very popular tool, and it uses auth. So it's an authorization layer for MCP is what matters. You can use the access controls with a human in the loop, or the APIs as well. This scope is not enough. Give me a bigger one. Give me a better one for high risk actions, and it works. It works alongside other gateways. So that's really cool if you get to that. Which brings us to another nice topic, compliance. We talked a bit about it before.
Yeah, we touched on it, and you mentioned some of the example organizations early on there, like banks, insurance, and healthcare. They're all like verticals that are under somewhat strict compliance, right? So, yeah, how does that fit in here? Because we do have these agents doing a bunch of stuff, and we need to be able to audit that, and regulators are going to ask new questions? No, they're probably not. They're going to ask the same questions that they pretty much have always asked. Who accessed the data? When? Why? And did the user or customer consent to all of this, right? Um, the difference here with AI agents is that probably harder to answer those questions, because if we think of our current systems, we probably built them for this. But in the AI world, if you haven't designed for this, it might be really hard to answer those questions. So we we have what we've talked about so far essentially is that robust architecture and the approach that has most of this like built in, right? If we think of those two identities that we talked about, which by the way, it could be more than two identities, and I didn't really fully explain it. What I meant with it could be more than two identities. It could be an agent acting on behalf of an agent that is acting on behalf of a user, and then essentially have three identities, right? Um, but if you build the architecture in that way, then you essentially have the traceability because you have the token that contains all of that access intelligence and the context and the consent for doing this if we've done a human in the loop as well, right? And so we've built this in to the architecture in itself. This will be able to answer the same um, regulatory audit questions that we've seen before. Um, and so we want to design for the audit, but it also means that we want to design this robust API architecture from the start, right? And if we do that, it kind of comes with it, right? That every token is sort of a record of who requested access, what they were allowed to do, and when that access expired, right? It's a part of the token and the access mechanism in itself. So this
Yeah,
is where access. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you touched already on this with your statement before that every token tells a story.
Exactly. It's in the token. And so it carries the identity of the requester, the scope of what's allowed to be done, what's permitted, right? And the context under which the token was issued, and when the token expires, which means when the access expires, right? And the consent is embedded here in the delegation chain. When a customer authorizes an agent to act on their behalf, we see that in the token. It's not a side channel or a separate lookup. It's part of the access mechanism here. And the dynamic aspect of this means we can kind of adjust this mid-flow. And I think you alluded to that, Judith, with zero standing privileges, and that we need to kind of we need to sort of redo this at certain points in access, right? It depends on what kind of resources that are being accessed, but we could change this in some ways mid flow, right? With human in the loop and escalated sort of authentication mechanisms, things of that nature. So if you're trying to access a higher value account or try to like execute a trade or something like that, we can perform a step up in that regard. So that is pulling in the human and performing a human in the loop. Lastly, here, many of these types of organizations that we mentioned as examples can obviously benefit from like financial grade APIs to bolster the security and all of this. But in from our perspective, we are also Curity is also FOPI certified and PSD2 compliant, ISO certification, SOC 2 compliant that we saw on the previous slide there. So that is definitely helps in regards to regulatory compliance too. Regulators will look at those certifications and leveraging standards to handle these things as well. It's not sort of proprietary stuff that needs to be investigated deeply. So the zombie problem in all of this. Agents are they're autonomous in nature, right? And non-deterministic. So we shift some sort of a well-behaved world or we could shift from a well-behaved world to like a not well-behaved world. The agent's intent can shift They could still be running authenticated, still hold permissions, but now their behavior has potentially changed. So this could end up being that zombie that we mentioned here. And this can get worse with like agent to agent approaches. Um, if we if we think of the agent to agent protocols, the agents can discover each other and start interacting, which is what we want to happen in a lot of cases. But the sprawl here continues, right, and escalates. It could mean that agents are talking to other agents that they shouldn't talk to, so they're crossing like trust boundaries, potentially accumulating additional permissions that nobody planned for. So the takeaway here is sort of trust trust your agent, but control the access. You want to empower the agents to do their job because a lot of times it's helpful for them to talk to other agents and do what they need to do. And so we need to trust them from that perspective. Otherwise, I think we will break a lot of the advantage here. But we need an access layer where we maintain control, right? Ephemeral tokens that you mentioned, Judith, with sort of narrow scope means that we reduce the blast radius of what could potentially happen, and we maintain control, and we control for the unexpected. So no standing access, no accumulated permissions, none of these like zombie agents with keys to the kingdom, right? With super permissions that can do everything, which is, I think, kind of a concern and a worry now when we see at the speed that organizations are deploying these kind of things. It's kind of like, hey, just give us an API key and let it have at it because we want to do it fast, and that's going to be a problem for sure, right?
Yeah, and we have a question from Stefan regarding like zero standing privileges and new access tokens all the time. And I think we can answer that one right now because it kind of fits into that. I mean, yeah, if you do it all the time, you for sure get like I assume that you're gonna see performance issues. So you have to like find a balance as always. What's the risk in having like giving an agent more access, longer lived access tokens? And I mean, not days, but maybe minutes, maybe 50 minutes instead, 5 minutes. What can happen? It's a risk analysis. It's a pretty boring task, but an important one that you have to do. You have to think about what can go wrong in worst case and design from there, find your parameters, I think.
Right. I mean, it goes back to sort of that the context and the kind of access or token intelligence and all of it, right? I mean, if we're talking about reading some non-PII information, then maybe that could be granted for minutes, as you would say, right? But if I'm executing a stock trade, well, maybe the agent shouldn't be able to do that for even for minutes, right? That should be like this
Yeah,
transaction only or for a few seconds or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. Hope that
So
answers
it's
the
it's
question.
kind of it's a boring answer of it depends that we get a lot, but it does depend. But you do have to trade off the balance between what is what does this token give access to and how long are we prepared to open up that access versus doing this all the time. Yeah.
So what do you need to scale the architecture, Jonas?
Yeah. So we mentioned it already. Stop modeling agents as users, their applications. So we need to like shift that mindset, which will essentially, simplify everything downstream from there. Um, Authorization is not persistent, right? It's going to end up being ephemeral to the degree that we just talked about. Like some of the authorization might live a little bit longer depending on what the permissions are. But definitely no directory entries for agents or like life cycle management or something like that. The agent should authenticate, get a scope token, do its work, and then it should things should disappear, right? This should be if you end up in a situation where you need to do cleanup of those things, you are definitely creating a headache and a problem, and I think a risk too. Um, the token intelligence part here is, we've mentioned every token carries a context or like tells the story, right? About what it depends on, or it matters what the API needs, who's asking on whose behalf, what's allowed to be done, and how much trust are we giving it right now, right? No static permissions that are set like 3 months earlier or something like that. And this also has to work at machine speed. We need to be able to do this hundreds or maybe thousands of times. So these agents are essentially ephemeral too. You can't manage the identity and the lifecycle managed manually of these, right? It needs to be automated provisioning, rotation, revocation, which comes with this, right? If we do it the right way, we avoid that whole life cycle, provisioning, rotation, and revocation. It should be automatic on its own, which happens when they're ephemeral, right? So I think this is the bits and pieces that can take you from like a proof of concept to production, um, which which is what we can kind of look at. Uh, we can look at the proof points here. We have some customers running this in production already, and Judith, you can talk a little bit more to some of those use cases there.
Yeah, we already mentioned one of them, EF Insurance with their EF service. So this is in Danish. I can't speak Danish either, but it says, well, welcome to EFGPT. So it's like a personal, I'm sure if assistant is a correct word, but it's a personalized customer service. So users can ask about their insurances and interact with the customer, like customer services, as they would. And EF Insurance, they're a pretty big company. They have millions of customers around the Nordics. They have several thousand employees in 7 countries. And they handle a big volume of traffic with hundreds of millions of API requests, almost 100 million access tokens that they issue, and a lot of user authentication. So this is not a small project. This is a pretty impressive launch, I think. And they serve this, they have launched this in Denmark. They have about 200,000 customers there that can access that service. And as I mentioned before, they could reuse their APIs and the APIs that they have for the mobile app. So they didn't have to implement any new agent-specific infrastructure or define a new security model. They could reuse what they have and implement that. So this is a service that they launched in September last year. And other production deployments are, token exchange with MCP authorizations for AI chatbots, with human in the loop for rights. That can, for example, banking customers that use ChatGPT to trade. And it allows you to implement financial grade authorization without, any modifications in the backend. And I don't have the access to the production setups, but I have a demo, and I'm too scared to do a live demo. So this is a recorded demo of how that can look like. So I'm gonna share the video. and show you how that can look like, how you can do and trade using ChatGPT. So here's a ChatGPT window with a custom app, as they call it. So it's a connection to a MCP client that supports stock-related functions. And we call it the Curity Portfolio app is the name of this integration in this example. So it shows the portfolio of John Doe in this example. And those are like no real values, it's all mocked. But you can, through the AI agent, buy new stocks. So you can first ask, I'm just going to pause a short minute. You can first ask it to list all the portfolio, but when you buy, you're going to need to prove and step up, so to say. And here we can see the first security, but that's actually in the front end. So this is ChatGPT noticing, well, something's going to go on here. I got an instruction to buy something. Is this really what you want to do? So this is ChatGPT. It's not really on the API. It's not on the API side that. So it's not no real authorization. This is just a double check from ChatGPT to make sure that they don't call a tool that the user doesn't want. So it's confirming the intent. But here we are sure we want to do that. And now the API kicks in and says, well, I'm not going to allow that unless the user confirms it through another signature. And this is a Swedish demo, so we're going to use the Swedish bank ID, which lets you design the transaction. So here we open the app, we're going to scan the QR code, and it asks us, do you want to really buy the NVIDIA stocks? And we say yes. And then it's going to poll, and we're going to see it updated the quantity. So this is how it can look like when you do it through an third-party AI agent. And I'm going to go back to the presentation.
So that actually, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily answering, but we do have a question that's assuming that application experience or agent experience is very different from user experience. If we reuse our APIs with AI agents, how do we provide agentic agent-specific experiences? And it's sort of what happened in that demo, right? You have sort of a stock trade. I don't know the underlying part of it, but it's sort of a stock trading API. And that could have been done through more of a static web application, which is more the user experience. But now the same API is called here from an agent, right?
Yeah, well, you have a middle layer here because the API it's a REST API, and you're not going to call that directly from the agent. There's an
Right.
MCP server in between that like translates the API to the agent experience, I'd say.
Exposes it as like a tool, but that could also be the MCP could also expose multiple combined APIs as a tool,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be sort of one-to-one there. But so the MCP is sort of the translation layer. You still have your own your original standard APIs that perform the same thing they do and are potentially used, like we mentioned before, by mobile apps or what have you.
Yeah, but it's still thinner than if you have AI specific APIs, I'd say.
Mhm. Yep.
This was just a proof of concept, but the examples we mentioned, those are not pilots anymore. They are running in production, similar to the proof of concept.
Very cool.
Yeah. So how do you get there? What are the steps we should take now?
Yeah. So some of this is what we've covered. Um, Design API first, which this is literally what we were just talking about here, sort of reusable
Mm,
governed APIs that can serve both our user experience and our agent experience, right? So if the APIs are designed right, then we don't really have to develop custom specific APIs for this.
right.
and then model the access for what the application needs. This is what we talked about in sort of don't use don't use the approach of who is the user here. Use the
Mm,
approach or the question, what does the application need, right? That's
mm.
um,
But that's a mind
that
shift that can be quite some work to actually implement, since it's a big shift, big change,
exactly.
I'd say. But you can do it with token intelligence. So if you like use tokens to get to that model, you can have dynamic short-lived context-aware tokens that allow you to do all of that. So you can keep the control on the API side, control the access, and yeah, enable the agent, trust the agent. And as we mentioned before, if you build the audit trail, you can check the compliance questions as well. So you get a lot of benefits from having good token design.
Yeah, I mean, it comes with it, right? It, I kind of hate to say that it comes with it automatically, but it almost does, right? You kind of get that part for free if you do the first bits of pieces here correct. You have sort of that stuff built in.
Yes, exactly. And this is, if you wanted to boil it down even more, API first design, application centric identity, and access intelligence, and you are there. Those are the three pillars that you can build your AI agents on, or your customer facing AI agents. Anything you want to add on that, Jonas, to scale with confidence as we write it here?
No, I think yeah.
Yeah, we iterated on it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but yeah, once again, we have seen that in production. We know customers using that, and we hope it helps you as well to get to a secure integration, because yeah, you don't want to lose trust in your customers either. Yeah, that means we are done. We are a few minutes over time, uh, but I think we have answered some of the questions. I can answer a very short one. Ephemeral clients are CMD client. Oh no, I can't remember. Client ID metadata document. That's correct. And if you use that standard, you have the same client ID for each instance. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I saw that question too, but then it also boils down to they're all going to get the same client ID, right?
Yeah,
But does it matter that they get the same client ID? Because we still have this, I mean, the notion of access intelligence, the token still tells a story, whether it's the same client ID or not. There's still a lot more context in that tokens that
yeah.
will differ, right?
Yeah, it can. The token can still tell you, well, user A used this agent to access this API at this point, right? So
Right.
you get a lot more information than just the client ID.
Right. So if I said before that we are now the not the subject, the context, like if that was, the subject is now just an attribute or what have you, then I mean it's kind of the same with the client ID to some degree, right? It's one piece of all of the intelligence in the token.
Yeah. And Stefan has another question regarding ontology. Yeah, that's a hard one. I think, and it's an important one as well, because what an access token means depends on how it's going to use, in which context it's going to use. One claim may mean something different in a different domain. So you have data management is a very important part here. The definitely, I'd say. So I don't think that you can have a like your policy is within your domain, right? It needs to know what that data means. If you get an access token from another domain, you need to translate it to your domain. That's
Right.
that's a hard one. So you need to have good data management and good understanding of what the data means in this context. Where does it come from? What does it mean? How should I interpret it? Definitely. I mean,
and like translate it to your
yeah,
world or your domain, right? Yep.
exactly. Exactly. Okay.
Good, good. We're over time. Thanks for you guys. Thanks, guys, for staying on, and hopefully this was useful.
And good luck with your implementations.
Yeah. Thanks, Judith.
Bye. Thank you.